Okay, let's talk about ageism. Does it exist? Absolutely. Do we want to stamp it out? Yeah, of course we do. In the real world, can we stamp it out? Well, we can try, but probably not. So one thing which I do want to highlight though is that I've identified a group of people who I think are as ageist as anybody. The good news though is that we can alter the way they think and maybe make a change for the better. So then I'm going to go on and talk about the ways in which we can turn the negative of ageism into a positive for those of us who feel like we're affected by it or maybe about to be. Okay, so let's talk about this group of people that I've identified who I think are guilty of ageism. The good news is though that I believe that we can adjust and remove to some extent their ageism. Who is this group? Well, it's people like me, and it could be people like you. So what I'm talking about here is that there are several different ways that we kind of self-sabotage, if you like, and I'd like to just highlight a few of those just so that we can see that there is an element that we can actually take on ourselves in dealing with things like ageism. Okay, so the first off is the sort of self-limiting behaviour that tends to creep in as we get older. From beyond 40 or so, we come up against tasks or things which we feel we're going to struggle to do, and it's purely because we've been told that at our age, or experience says that people of our age can't do whatever it is we're looking at. Well, I'm too old for that is a kind of phrasing. We can't expect anything like that. I'm way too old for that sort of thing. I just don't think that's reasonable. I think there are very few things these days that you can't at least have a good crack at when you are older and get as much enjoyment out of and do as good a job, to be honest. So that sort of self-limiting behaviour is the first item. And the second one is one which actually I just find really irritating, so I'm going to mention it. And that is the whole sort of self-deprecating, jokey, doing ourselves down because we happen to be older. All it does is reinforce the stereotypes, and it just perpetuates the idea that older people can't do things. Stuff gets blamed on being old that has nothing to do with being old. Classic phrase in this case, oh sorry, I'm just having a bit of a senior moment. No, I don't believe you are having a bit of a senior moment. I believe you're just not concentrating properly. Because you think you haven't got the powers of concentration you used to have, basically you kind of give up. I feel like that's something that we should fight against really hard. I don't think there's anything like a senior moment. I was a dreamer when I was 8. I'm still a dreamer today. Nothing has changed. That's the sort of thing which I just think does us down and belittles us in the eyes of people who might be predisposed towards ageism. The next one is even more personal, because this is one which I think my dad was guilty of, and that is the idea that in some way anything to do with digital or tech is for the young people, and if you're old, it's nothing to do with you and you can't possibly grasp it. So that's something which is just not the case, especially in consumer tech. Anything that's released to the general public these days, by definition, is going to try and play to as big a demographic as possible, and by cutting it off at some arbitrary 40, 60, 80, they're just reducing the market share. So I believe that all consumer tech is eminently understandable, provided you're willing to put in a bit of time on it. And if you're looking into more technical areas, that just means, like any other technical skill, you just have to learn it. It's not something that you're automatically disbarred from just because you happen to be older. And the final one I'm just going to touch on is, as we get older, I do think we get a predisposition towards getting into a comfort zone and not stepping out of it, to the point where we eventually get quite nervous or fearful of change. I think that that is a big mistake, because I think change is what keeps our brains going. It's what gives us a bit of a challenge. Frankly, it puts us under a little bit of stress, and that element of stress is not a bad thing. Sometimes stress can be a help, and change is the agent by which we can put ourselves under a bit of stress. Okay, I'll climb down off my hobby horse now, and let's talk about ways in which ageism is a bad thing, but we can actually harness it and turn it to our advantage. And I'm going to give you a few examples of that in the second half of this video. Okay, before we move on, can I just ask you if you wouldn't mind please hitting the like button? Even better, hit the subscribe button. It's a real help to the channel and keeps me motivated. Thanks a lot. Maybe it's because young people don't have it yet, but the value of experience is something which is not really recognized by people who tend to be ageist in their outlook. So there's a real differentiator here, and that has been the root of my business for the last 10 years, and that is I've got a load of experience in a load of different areas to do with delivering programs, which means that I automatically move ahead of people who may be better technically than me but haven't been round the loop as many times as I have. People are more willing to trust people who they know have done the job before and know how things can work, and importantly, how things can go wrong. So there is something of a danger here that we have to address, and that is sometimes you can come across as being some kind of old soldier who's done this thing loads of time before and nobody can tell them what to do. That's not the right message at all. The message is that you may be able to contribute more than might seem to be the case simply because you've seen something similar in the past and you remember what went wrong. Okay, so if that's a fairly business-centered point, the second one is not necessarily business-centered, although it is still critical in business. We mainly deal in business with people, and over time, over 30 or 40 years in business, you get to know people really well. You get to understand the type, and you can start bringing emotional intelligence to an issue with a person. You can, if you like, if you're a salesperson, you know what their hot buttons are and you can press them. That type of thing as well works throughout the business world and in personal life as well. Emotional intelligence can really guide you and give you a step ahead of people that haven't got it when it comes to dealing with difficult people, and especially in identifying when somebody is covering up something which is the root cause of their apparently could be ageist behavior. For example, if somebody is perhaps confrontational, it can be simply because they're feeling under threat. Maybe they know that they don't know quite as much as might be necessary for something, and they fear that you might be the person to highlight it. So you can actually disarm people who are feeling defensive simply by not offering a threat, but by offering them a resource to help them rather than confront them. Metaphorically, I always try and get on the same side of the table as people like this, because once they no longer see you as a threat, you can actually become a really good team because they might have technical skills which you don't have. That type of emotional intelligence is something which you learn over decades. The third one, it's a kind of a tactical approach which I quite often use because it really works when you're dealing with straightforward ageist people. What they're doing is underestimating what we are capable of, and that offers a real opportunity, because if they underestimate you, then you can basically blow them into the weeds at some point down the line. I over-contribute hugely to solving a problem. That basically sets the person right in terms of their ageist beliefs, and it gives you a real step forward. If you're working in a team especially, your value to the team is absolutely on display. The fourth item is one which is really good because it really leverages experience again. So when a team is under pressure and people are young and maybe looking to prove themselves, they will often launch themselves straight into trying to resolve an issue or delivering something without stopping, pausing and making sure that what they're proposing is the correct course of action. Yes, you can't wait for too long, but where experience comes in is that we can basically identify that everything is done much better if everybody is A, on the same page, and B, has a clear picture of what's going to happen in order to reach the goal. Pausing at the beginning frequently gets omitted by people who are feeling under stress to deliver, and that's often people who are younger. They will want to get going. Whereas if you can just make sure that everybody is clear on everything, that type of almost mentor role is something which is really easy to take advantage of when you have experience. And the final one I wanted to just mention is that frequently people who have kind of ageist beliefs or take an ageist approach often equate age with fragility and inability to persevere, whereas in fact for me that's exactly wrong. Age can generate endurance. We are in it for the long haul. We've been in it for a long time for the long haul, and we don't allow ourselves to be knocked off by the first reversal. Other people can be easily discouraged when things start to go wrong and maybe give up before they need to. For me, older people have the power of endurance and are willing to stick things out even when it looks like things might be going wrong. Okay, so just before we finish, I wanted to mention something else. When we're thinking about ageism, ageism can be something which we can use as a crutch or an excuse or an easy route out. Yes, ageism, of course ageism is an issue. All I'm saying is that I don't necessarily think it's quite as widespread as sometimes we believe. I think people just want to get jobs done, and if it means they have to employ somebody who's got grey hair or none at all, then they're quite happy to do that. Just make sure before you blame some organisation for their ageism that you've done everything you possibly can to make sure that you're the best person for any role. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks.